This little screen here was just an opportunity to kind of get to know you all a little bit, but we don't have the annotation tools available in this webinar format. But if you want to chat in your chat window, you can just let us know who you are. And Kathleen had already let me know that we have about half families and about half providers here. And we're assuming that we have some folks from preschool and also from early intervention. Hopefully there's some administrators here as well. So will, you know, just let us know. Oh, EI, we have a PT here. Very good. Thank you so much for coming and joining. All righty, so we'll just move on. Just a few things to think about today is we're just going to do some basic overview of assistive technology. So what is AT? How do you make decisions about AT? And how do you embed AT throughout the day? We have, I have a lot of slides, and we're just going to pop through lots of pictures of assistive technology, and we hope that prompts you to think about some additional ideas for AT related to communication and using visuals and literacy supports as well. So oh good, we have a parent and we have an early childhood special educator there. I think we always need to begin with, oh, before I jump into the research, I did want you to know that you do have some handouts that you can access, and that is the PowerPoint. We have an example of assistive technology, using assistive technology for young children. That's from the PACER project. And then there's a visual supports checklist in your handouts. And also there's a little handout that you can print off. It's a little booklet called AT Tools in Schools. And it really focuses probably a little more heavily on K through 12, but it's a great resource if you want to share with others. So, okay, jumping into some of the research, and I'm not going to read these slides to you, but I think it's really important to highlight a couple of things, and that is that first top left box is that AT is really underutilized, and we've been hearing that from lots and lots of folks that you know, they don't use a lot of AT with any age, but especially with our children from birth to age 5. Some people think that my child's really not ready for AT yet, or, you know, my students really need to have these particular skills before we start with AT. But as you can see on the bottom, there are no prerequisite skills for a child to have before using assistive technology. So in fact, we hope AT will help them gain even more skills. I like that data on the top right box about how it significantly improves outcomes for infants and toddlers in both socio-emotional and pre-academic skills. And then on the bottom right, you do play an important role in assisting in assistive technology, increasing the knowledge of others, and getting AT for your children that you serve. And I just wanted to share a little story. I love this story. About 11 years ago, a colleague and I were contacted by a very small school division to come in and look at a child and talk with a teacher about a little kindergarten student that she had just begun to serve. So we went out to this school division, and this little guy had just turned 5 years old. He had cerebral palsy, and he did not have any way of communicating with others other than some eye motions and some little noises that he was making. And the teacher said, you know what? I saw something on TV about a person named Stephen Hawking, and he used his eyes to communicate. Could there be something out there that we could help this young man with? And so that was the beginning of eye gaze exploration for him. He's now almost in high school and uses an eye gaze system very proficiently. But if this kindergarten teacher had not said, I've got this young man and I think there's something that will work for him with perhaps eye gaze, see what an important role any of you can play in getting that type of AT. And that's very complex AT. He's very proficient with it. And, you know, we love to come back and see how he's doing. A little more data. You can just read some of the things there. I love the one on the bottom right, that it's effective with 89% of students who struggle with verbal communication, and that it can double the graduation rate of your students with certain disabilities. So that is really quite profound. So AT, I'm sure most of you or all of you have already seen a definition of assistive technology, and that is grounded in the law and grounded in IDEA, and it really talks about two things, that AT is defined as both a device and it's also a service. And a device can be anything. It can be something that's homemade, it can be something that you purchased, it can be an item that you have modified, as long as it's used to increase or improve the functional capabilities of a child with a disability. So my favorite piece of AT is a piece of duct tape. Can you guess in your minds how a piece of tape or duct tape might be used? For me, I use it in a lot of different ways, but I like using tape to tape down a piece of paper so a child can be more successful in drawing or painting and the paper won't slide around on the table. So I tape a lot of things down, and I think it's a great piece of assistive technology. Also, we don't want to forget about services. Services are so important. What is it to introduce a piece of assistive technology without providing training to the family, to the teachers, to anybody who's working with the child, even to the peers? So training is an important part of the service piece, as well as evaluation and identification and selection of the AT. Did you know that repairing equipment is also an AT service? So two important pieces of definitions there in the legislation. Okay, and this little slide here really just says that AT can support anything and everything that a child is doing. So there's no area of development or skill area that there's not a piece of the technology, assistive technology out there. So some people do get a little bit confused between what's technology and what is assistive technology. And particularly now, as we are really looking and using a lot of technology in the virtual world here for virtual instruction and communication, some families and teachers will say, I need a piece of assistive technology for my student and I need an iPad. And so we'll ask questions like, well, how are you going to be using the iPad? And what about the iPad makes it assistive technology? So those are kind of important questions to ask there, because an iPad by itself is a piece of technology. It's not necessarily assistive technology. But when you add an app, like on the right side, the LAMP app is the language acquisition through motor planning. That's an app that really helps with communication, and that added to an iPad makes the iPad assistive technology. So if you also look on the left, an iPhone, is a piece of technology. We try not to use it with our little ones, but we know that sometimes it's a good support, especially if you're going to add a timer like on the right to it. So then that makes it assistive technology. So just thinking about assistive technology is a term that's really relevant for our students and our children with disabilities. So why use AT? We know it helps all children with disabilities, but it helps them participate in everyday activities in order to really grow and learn. And we think about, inclusion, and we promote inclusion so strongly. And we know that AT really provides an important role with our kids in terms of accessing activities, accessing and participating with our peers, and participating in activities, not just sitting and watching. And then of course we have supports, AT supports, and that's in all environments that they're in all natural environments. So want to just keep in mind that for AT for infants and toddlers, it looks very different than AT for our older students and adults. For older students and adults, often we're looking at things like text-to-speech programs or other, there's a Desmos app. There's an online Desmos math program that a lot of students are using now, and there are a lot of, adaptations for our older students with vision impairments. There are a multitude of apps and extensions, especially for our older students, that are not appropriate for our infants and toddlers. And so the other really important point on this slide is that AT changes as you grow. You might start with one communication device, and then 2 years later we find that that's not working right now, so we'll make an adjustment to that, or try something different. So, and then another, 3 years later, we're looking at something completely different. So AT really changes over the lifetime. Kathleen had mentioned that we would talk about low to high tech assistive technology. And we used to define low tech as any item that did not have a computer chip in it. Well, my goodness, if you look at almost anything now, there's a computer chip embedded. And I like to use the example of there's a bookmark now. It used to be just a little paper bookmark that we'd use. Now there's a computer chip embedded in the bookmark that helps us determine how long we've been reading or how long we've been looking at a particular page. So low tech is something that's very simple, little maintenance, and little or no electronics. And that also could be no tech things like that tape. That's just no tech. Then, of course, there's a little fuzziness now between what's considered mid-tech and what's considered high-tech. But high-tech is definitely those very complex electronics. Remember, I mentioned the eye gaze communication system for this young man. That would be a high-tech device. Anything that helps with environmental access or a computer system that has been modified with some special adaptations, that's certainly much more high-tech there. So I'm going to show you some examples here. So here are some good examples of more low-tech for our young children there. And we see some little, pencil grips, and we all use nubby crayons and things like that that provide a little more access. We have a book, an adapted book page on the left side that keeps our kids, helps our little ones with counting and keeping up with the story. And then on the right side, there is some partner assisted eye gaze system here that is simply a piece of acrylic with a hole cut in the middle of it, and it has some alphabets and some other, words that will be posted there. So these are some examples of no-tech solutions. Here's some mid-tech. These are several communication devices. This one on the left side helps you use a switch with with something like a blender or a fan that has an on-off switch, and you can attach this and attach a switch, and it helps this child turn on, something that's in their room at home, or maybe turn on a light switch. So you can see some very simple kinds of technology there. Up in the right hand side, that is an adapted mouse so that you have an easier time. You can push the blue button is the left button on the mouse, and the yellow button is the right button on the mouse, and then there's a trackball. The yellow ball in the middle is a trackball. So these are more mid-tech. And then we have some high-tech devices. And you can see that, of course, our positioning devices certainly can be very high-tech and need the expertise of a PT to help adjust those and make sure that those are upgraded and changed as the child grows and learns. Of course, here on the right side, there's a more complex communication devices there. So high-tech options. So we wonder, how do we make these decisions about how do we know whether a low-tech device is the thing we're going to need, or is it something mid or high-tech? How do we make those decisions? And according to the federal law, the use of AT must be considered for every student that has an IEP or an IFSP. So it's a conversation that really should take place during an IEP meeting or an IFSP meeting, but it also should take place at any time that you think that an AT device might help a student be more successful or more independent. So AT consideration is the term that we use for that. And here's just a little clarification that for early this is a little clarification Part C letter that was done, I think, back in 2003. And it just clarifies for early intervention, AT really needs to relate to the developmental needs of our infants and toddlers. And that's, in the domains of physical, social, emotional, language, cognition, and adaptive skills. So AT is important in early intervention as well. So remember I mentioned the AT network. We worked with the Department of Education to develop a decision-making tool called the AT consideration guide. And the AT consideration guide is something that IEP teams, it's designed more for school as opposed to for IFSP teams, but this is a guide that IEP teams can use during their IEP meetings or even at another time to really make decisions about AT. And you can see on this guide that it asks some questions like, what areas is the student really having difficulty in? This applies to early childhood, so we'd say children. What areas are the children having difficulty in? This part 2 of the guide here really talks about accessible instructional materials, and those are Braille materials, large print materials, digital materials that our students that are in mostly, K through 12 can access free of charge if they meet the requirements for getting that. Of course, for very young children too, for our preschoolers, you can request, Braille materials and large print materials as well. So the second part, the flip side of this guide, helps the IEP team look at what are the instructional areas or the specific tasks that are difficult for the student. And then the team has a conversation about these are the things that we're working and doing right now. These are the things that are successful. These are some areas that the student is still having some difficulty with. So it helps the team really engage in what are those areas of difficulty? What else might we try with the child or the student? So under part 4, your team has a conversation of, well, let's see, this thing is not really working right now for them. Maybe this, adapted feeding tool is not working with them. We need to find another one that's going to meet their needs. So under part 4, your team would write down, we'd like to try this, this particular bowl. It sits a little differently and it attaches differently to the table. And then we want our OT as a person who's going to go and explore that tool and come back, trial it out, and then our team will meet again in the last section to determine whether those trials were successful and whether that is indeed the device that we need to use or if we should choose something else. So that's a really nice decision-making guide. We at the Department of Education are in the process of updating that guide. And so within the next year, we should have something a little different to help teams, something a little easier, we hope. This IEP AT consideration guide is also embedded in Virginia IEP for those divisions that use Virginia IEP for their IEP development. And thank you, Kathleen, for putting the definitions in there. Okay, it is a complement to that consideration guide is something called the Virginia Assistive Technology Resource Guide. And that is a guide that really lists, it starts with what, instructional area you're looking at and what are some of the standard tools that you might use, what are some modifications to those standard tools, and then what are some possible AT solutions. So it's kind of a little dictionary of assistive technology. So if your team that's meeting really doesn't have a lot of information about AT for a particular area, they certainly can go back and explore that guide and find some ideas there. There's another way that you can dig a little deeper into making those decisions. And so this is called the SET framework, and it was developed by Dr. Joy Zabala, and it is nationally used everywhere, honestly. The SET framework, you will hear about the SET, and the SET stands for Student, Environment, Task, and Tools. So it helps your team take a little deeper dive into what are some of the needs of the student. And so the team would get a piece of flip chart paper or use your virtual interactive whiteboard if they're doing this meeting virtually, and first would on that chart paper look at the student and would think about tell us more about the student, tell us about their personality, tell us about their strengths and their skills and their interest and things that they really enjoy doing and how they interact with their peers and how independent they are, what are some of their preferences. So you really have a nice conversation about tell us who this student is or who is this child that we're talking about. And then we're going to look at the environment. Maybe if we're doing virtual instruction, we really need to look closely at the home environment. What is the lighting like? What's the area that the student is, the child is playing in? What are some of what siblings are around, or other children are in their home to interact with this particular child? What are some of the distractions, both at home or in a school environment? What materials and equipment are around in this particular environment? And what are some of the expectations for the staff or for the family for that particular child? Then we'd look at what is the very specific task that this child is having difficulty with. And so if an IFSP team member, an IEP team member might say, this child is having difficulty with drinking. And so what's specific about that drinking skill is hard for them? Is it holding a cup? Is it taking the cup from the table to their mouth? Is it returning the cup to the table without it falling over? Is it sipping and swallowing? What's the specific skill area that student or child is having difficulty with? And so what are some of the IEP goals and objectives that you have around that particular area here? So and then the tools. And then we look at the tools, once we've identified that task that is challenging for that particular child, then we look at the tools. Often teams will say, well, I've already got this adapted piece of equipment over here. And we'll say, hold the phone. Let's go through the other pieces before we really start thinking about tools there. So then that's when we have a discussion about those tools, and we make a decision about what tools to try. I see in the chat shouldn't there be a resource guide for early intervention as well? And that's something that we should talk to our early interventionist about what resources are out there for making those decisions during IFSP members. I'm going to follow up with Corey Hill about that, who does a lot of the EI training, and see what is out there in that area. And you others may have some good ideas about that as well. Please just put them in the chat window. Okay. One other tool that's out there, sorry, this is a very blurry picture. This is Pete Suite, and Pete Suite is another decision-making guide out there that really helps with their making decisions for our children that are birth to 5. And Pete Suite has really prompts you to look at the activities in the environment and looking at, where children really need to have AT adaptations. It is packed full of, there's a little funny looking little paper, sort of a USB key that's included in Pete Suite, and it has a lot of forms and resources there. So if you're interested in learning more about Pete Suite, particularly maybe if you have a classroom or if you are working in early intervention as well, we have them in our libraries, and I believe every TTAC has one. So if you'd like to check that out, you can check them out and see what resources are there to help your team make those decisions. So how do you plan for AT implementation? And we just want to remember too that every child is unique and different, and that includes their little personalities, their little unique qualities about them. Some are shy and boisterous, and some are more self-confident, and some are really movers and shakers. They all have different communication styles. And when we're choosing assistive technology, we want to think about those things too, because we really want all of our kids to be more self-confident. And there's some research that says that AT can help to build that self-confidence. So we're going to flip through some slides rather quickly, just showing some ways that AT can be used in these environments. And I'm sure you're using a lot of these things already, and none of these are maybe new to you, but it might prompt you to think, you know what, I kind of forgot about that. Maybe I will go back and try that with this particular student. So we know home schedules are really critical. There's a link at the back of the presentation for a quick little video that we just did, the little steps to creating a schedule for use at home and why that might be helpful. Social stories down here in the middle. You can see when I feel angry, social stories are so helpful for so many of our kids. And this is a time that is very, trying for a lot of our children and families and teachers and and everyone in education now. And I was recently hearing someone talk about their young man with autism and how every morning he still sits on the front steps waiting for the bus to come. So a social story can be really helpful in a situation like that. Timers are great, of course, adapted utensils, and then our communication tools up there. So here's some things that you might commonly see throughout a classroom setting. And we think that an overall schedule is always very helpful. An attendance schedule is something that's nice and visual, so our children can keep up with who has come to school that day. Maybe an announcement using a communication device to announce, "Hey, I'm here. How's everybody doing?" At the entrance to the classroom. Schedules just in general are helpful for young children. And then, of course, anything that might help our kids make more choices. Using AT, whatever you have available is, choice is so important. And we want our kids to all learn to be, self-advocates. That's a really big thing in the transition ages, those students that are 14 to 21. We want them to learn to be self-advocates. Morning activities. So here's some things that you might see or you've used in your classroom before for morning activities. And we have some choices here during circle time. I love this picture on the bottom of all of the different seating, that every child has something very different to meet their sensory needs and to help them stay engaged in that circle time. So you can see from the young man that has the rocking chair to the little girl who really needs to move around on the little, bouncy chicken or duck or whatever that is. And I love that this young lady has her little blanket that she can wrap herself and make herself feel much more secure in that environment. Up on the upper right, you see a teacher who's using a Promethean board to do a weather activity. And I like how she's making it more relevant. It's not just a board that the kids are looking at. She's got these props. Like, here's the prop that she has with all the little cotton balls on it. So if it's a cloudy day, let's sort of feel and touch and feel what those clouds might feel like. So she's using some visual and some tactile supports to increase their understanding of what the weather is. Centers and playtime. Of course, there are plenty of different assistive technologies that are out here. You can see that this young man on the left is using a tool to read a story to him. There's a child in the middle that has a switch activated toy. And of course, just a caution with switch activated toys, they're great, they're wonderful, they're expensive. They can be adapted. You can make your own battery adapter to make any toy that's operated by a battery into a switch operated toy. If you want some information on that, we're happy to share it. But we also don't just want to put a switch toy in front of a child and hope that that's going to provide some entertainment and interest for them for a long period of time. We really want to connect it to whatever topic or theme we are having in the classroom. So if we're reading the Dalmatian story, this is a great little support for that student to really help them understand the Dalmatian. So those are some ideas for centers and playtime. Story time, we're going to talk about a little bit more, but there are a million different ways that you can adapt a book and make them more interactive. I want to talk a little bit more about that, dig a little deeper into that. Literacy and numeracy development. You can see some nice examples of how we are engaging our students in making choices. And this young man with the iPad on the very bottom in the middle, he has a glove that the finger has been cut out to help him to use his pointer finger to make his selections on the iPad. And you can see an adapted keyboard up here as well. So lots and lots of different adaptations for lunch and snack time. You can see those, and adaptations for outside play. This young lady on the very bottom, this little girl here has a Go Baby Go adapted car. And this is really a wonderful new initiative that'll initiatives that universities are taking on in their tech programs. They are adapting cars so our little ones with motor difficulties can really explore and interact with the kids on their own terms, really get there and get involved in activities. So that Go Baby Go initiative is wonderful. Of course, supports for going home at the end of the day with schedules and, again, social stories and some of this little backpack adapted for them. And then communication. Communication is probably one of the most important areas of assistive technology for our students that really have some challenges with communication. It's just so critical. And here are some examples of communication tools that are out there. We talk about communication systems because we want our children to use their voice, use their body language, point to things, and also supplement with augmentative communication devices like some of these picture supports that you see here. So what is AAC? It's augmentative and alternative communication, and it is a form of communication to help supplement or replace spoken or written language. And it's, as we said, it could be gestures or signing or pictures, electronic devices, anything that's going to help a child communicate. And so the goals of AAC, I love this on the right. It's the ability to communicate anything on any topic to anyone. So not just to communicate to your parents, but also to communicate to the other children that you are around, or maybe communicate to your grandma, or communicate to, to Uncle Jack. Anyone that is part of your natural environment, we want you to be able to communicate to. So AAC has grown so much, and there's so many different options out there for our children. There is a particular myth is my child is too young and doesn't have the skills needed to use a communication tool. And another part of that myth is if I use a communication device like an AAC device, then my child won't learn how to talk. And that's a fear. That's a really, really big fear for our families. But in fact, there are no prerequisites to using an AAC device. Every child communicates, and every child, wants to communicate and needs to communicate. And there's some really important research that says starting to use an AAC device does not interfere with your verbal language acquisition. In fact, 89% of those students who use AAC devices have improved speech. And it's only 11% of children who have used it that did not have any change in their verbal language. So teachers, as I mentioned about the teacher that really started the ball rolling with the young man with the eye gaze device, you all play such an incredible role, teachers and families, as facilitators of language development and communication. So it's so important. So we want communication to be naturally occurring in all of the environments that our children are in. We want them to really use communication to build those social skills and interactions with their peers and anyone around them. We want their AAC systems and communication systems to build more complex language systems, and it also builds the foundations for literacy development. So there's a lot of research on why AAC is really important with their young children. Okay, communication involves not just asking for something or not just making a choice. I want drink, I want eat, I want, toys. It's also protesting. I don't want that. Or commenting about something. That's cool. I like it. I want more of that. Asking questions like, what's that? And giving opinions and, telling things that are happening around them and starting a conversation. So that's a lot of complex communication functions there, isn't it? So if you think about, gosh, how on earth are we going to choose the words that are the most important for our children to use when they are communicating with others? How do I do that? So there's something that's been gaining some steam. The use of core and fringe vocabulary words. It used to be that we might set up a little device and have a, one message on it that says, I want to eat, or, I want to drink. And now we are really promoting using core vocabulary, and those are the words that we commonly use throughout our day. And I'll show you some examples of that. It doesn't change across environments or between users, and it allows someone to communicate on almost any topic across the day. So those are core words, and they're 80% of what we are saying now. So if you think about how I'm talking and the words that I'm using now, I'm using things like, more and that and this and go and stop and those types of words, as opposed to specific words like fringe vocabulary, is really based on things that we are communicating about within our environment. Like if we're reading a book about dogs, fringe words might be dog, leash, park, those kinds of things. So core words and fringe words are now the research-based way of approaching language development. We used to put together a communication system. Thank you, Kathleen, 20 minutes left. A communication system that had, more things I want, like fish or chicken nuggets or drink or cookies. And now we promote using words like good and more and look and not and drink. So you can combine some words here, some core words to communicate about more than you could just on that other choice board. So if you say more drink or stop drink or finish drink or, open drink or put drink here, put drink down, those are ways that you can build language using core words, and it's much more applicable to a variety of situations. So I just wanted to kind of share that about AAC and how important augmentative and alternative communication is for our young children. We're going to jump real quickly into visuals to support play and learning, and these are just a few good examples of that. So visual supports are something most all of us use. I do believe that most of us have checklists and to-do list, and I put my pocketbook by the side door if I'm getting ready to leave to remind me to take it, along with my cell phone and my keys. So those are visual supports that I use, and our children really benefit from visual supports too. I'm sure many of you are familiar with Temple Grandin, who is an adult with autism, and she really talks about what a visual thinker she is. And she says, I am a visual thinker, not a language-based thinker. And my brain is like Google Images. So if you mention the word dog, she says her brain goes through this, this flip file or this, Google search of all the images of dogs that she has in her brain. And so she really processes information using visual supports. We were going to do this before, but I don't think we'll save a little time here, because I'm sure that all of you are using visual supports in some way with your children or in your home or in your classrooms. I think this is worth just mentioning, that visual supports really increases the understanding of language, and it allows for some processing time for our students. So if you were telling your little one, pick up your shoes, get your shoes now. Okay, it's time to get your shoes. And your little one is not really processing that. You might be able to show a picture of their shoes, or show a little picture of shoes, and that will help with that understanding and that processing time. So that's a good kind of a visual support strategy to use. And the other thing about a visual is it remains static in our environment. So if we have that picture, it's there, and your child can refer back to that picture of shoes. Oh yeah, she's asking me to get my shoes. Oh, here are my shoes. Oh, I'm looking at the picture. Those are the shoes I need to get. So it really helps to keep that information static. And of course, our goal is always to help our children be more independent and to learn more rapidly, and to decrease that frustration, anxiety, and aggression in some of our students. So I'm just going to show you a bunch of different pictures about routines and transitions and some types of visual supports, and not get into too much detail, but we know transitions are very hard for some of our children, and it's hard for some of us as well, us adults as well. So classroom schedules and daily calendars can really help support that. I think if you are really trying to set up a daily home schedule or a daily classroom schedule, going to Pinterest is, you will find amazing resources there and ideas there, and lots of free printable downloads there if you are looking at that particular area. Individual schedules we know help our children. Some children, most of the children that I have worked with really need to have a partial day schedule, not a full day schedule. Sometimes a full day schedule is just way overwhelming. So you might start with just a morning schedule. What do we do first? Well, maybe this is not beginning with getting dressed in the morning, but preparing to go to school or preparing to go somewhere. We're going to eat our breakfast, and we're going to put on our shoes, put on our coat, put on our backpack if we're going to school, get in the car, and then, oh yay, we're going to have a good day. So that's an example of sort of a partial day schedule. Of course, you would make this schedule based on the activities within your daily schedule. First in schedules, I think, are awesome for decreasing frustration for our young kids. If you have your child who, loves to go outside and play, but then we have a difficulty getting them back inside, then maybe the first thing we're doing is we're playing outside, but then let's think of something that's highly motivating for that particular child that's going to help get them back in the house. So maybe they love to have a little snack. So first we're going to go outside, and then we're going to have a snack. So that's how you might set up the least preferred on the left side, and then the most preferred on the right side. So first in schedules are really great for reducing frustration and helping to guide a child through a couple of activities. Mini schedules are really helpful. Washing hands is such a big deal now that a mini schedule for washing hands is helpful. Up in the middle, we have an example of this is an old video cassette box that you can keep your pictures in, and you can put your schedule on the outside. I love that. Task schedules are important for some of our students or children who need them. And then we want to think about how we're going to format the schedule. Again, there's a short little video that's linked in the resources in the back that you can go back and look at this information. If you need any help with any of this, you can call us at TTAC or talk to your team that you're working with to help pull this together here. But formatting schedules, we might use pictures, we might need objects for some kids. And then teaching the schedule might be the most important part about using a schedule. You can't set up a schedule, post it on the wall, and expect our kids to understand exactly what that's all about. So we really want to teach the use of a schedule, and there are some, variety of ways to do that. Classroom rules and helper charts are really important visuals for our kids. And then, of course, visual supports during center. So, in the book nook, we can only have 3 people in the book nook. So we want to make sure that we don't have too many people in the book nook. Other visual reminder cards and time timers. I have my little time timer sitting right here in front of me too that I'm using. So I'm going to jump over here to, of course, visuals for communication supports. We've already talked about those more complex AAC systems, but there are other smaller, simpler visual support systems that we can use throughout the day. And we always need backups to those higher tech communication devices. We want to remember, let's print them off, because sure enough, that AAC device is going to break at some point or run out of batteries. So we always want to have backups there. These are some other little visual supports for communication. In the top left is a little communication cards that are on a little popsicle stick. So if you have several children sitting around a table, or maybe even at family dinner time, this is good for kids. They can pull a little card out and it can say, what did you do today? Or what's your favorite bug? Some sort of communication prompts to keep that language development going. receptive and expressive language, supports. We talked a little bit about that. And of course, self-regulation is an area that we need lots of visual supports. And whether it be a voice volume kind of a scale there, or some quick ways that I can calm myself down. These are great for posting around the house during those times of frustration. Maybe it's in the kitchen, or maybe it's, in a bedroom or in another area. So there's a checklist that I think I mentioned at the beginning that you have, especially for classroom teachers, but families might find it helpful too, to just think about what kinds of visual supports they're using throughout the day. And then adapting books. Might be one of my very, 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 very favorite areas is adapting books. And there are a lot of good supports. There's a link in the PowerPoint, if you got it digitally, to this nice little video about why read to babies and young children. And it really emphasizes that 90% of brain development happens between birth and 3. So it's never too young to start reading to our babies and our children. It really does improve language and cognitive skills, and it strengthens our social emotional bonds as well. So this is important research to know too, that adults read to children with disabilities less often and tend not to offer repeated readings of books. So we need to read to all of our kids, regardless of their ability areas, often and repeated reading, so kids become familiar with the text in a book and the pictures in a book, and can guess and feel real confident in reading it themselves. So adapting books is a really great way to get kids engaged and more independent. You can see page fluffers that are on these particular books here, and page fluffers can be made out of anything from a piece of Velcro or a piece of foam that you attach to each of the pages. Makes those board books easier to turn the pages, and it also makes paper books easier to turn pages. Slant boards are great for raising the visual perspective of a book and helping some kids really get access to the books. And then some other things for our young kids, we can make squishy books with, hair gel and objects put into a really heavy duty plastic bag and then reinforced all the way around with duct tape. That makes a really great squishy book. And if there's something that you are, like it's fall is coming, so maybe we can gather acorns and leaves and things outside that are fall related, some sticks and things to help promote fall. And then of course you can make bag books with any of your sandwich bags, and just put objects in them and glue them together or staple them together, and then put tape around them to keep them all together. So great ways to get our kids engaged in reading. Adding objects to a book to really reinforce the understanding of what's in the book and what's happening in the book. So you can see that on the left side, and you can just take a big baggie and put your book in it, and all the little objects you found around the house or in the classroom that might support understanding there. Providing some contrast. And you can make, how in books there are repeating lines, if you were to write your own repeating line in, like we know that It's a Bitsy Spider went up the water spout, and then you could add, rain, rain, rain to each of the pages, rain, 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 or another repeating line to each of the pages, so your children can really get involved in that. Adding some core words to your books, and there are lots of free books that really target core words. Numeracy. I love when we take a book and we add pictures in the book, and then put Velcro on those pictures so that they can attach those pictures to the places in the books where they might find those pictures. Another way to sort of make them more engaging. Here's examples of some story boxes or story bags. And then of course, toy modifications is another area that we want to really think about. How can we provide access to all of our kids in the activity in the classroom? If we're using, the heart stamp or the bird stamp, or I'm not sure exactly what stamp that is, then how can we make it accessible for a student with a physical disability? So there's some lots and lots of ways that you can adapt toys. Another area of assistive technology. I love the shelf liner from the dollar store, and how you can put it on a cookie tray and it keeps the toys from sliding around. It keeps them contained. And again, here's some other ideas for confining toys and keeping them contained in an area for the child to be even more successful. So I know that was fast and that was really quick. So just a couple of quick takeaways before we open it up to some questions. Always want to be creative and make modifications using the materials that you already have when that's possible. Make a visit to your local dollar store, and you can call me. I'll go with you because I love to shop the dollar store for assistive technology. There are lots and lots of things like that shelf liner that we just showed. AT decisions can be made at any time, not just during IEP or IFSP development. Think about AT just throughout the day and at any time that you were working with a child or interacting with your own child. AT changes through the years. We talked about that. And then encouraging your child to use their own voice to tell us, I like this piece of AT. I don't like that. I like the way this feels, but I don't like that. So we want to build that independence and that confidence and that voice in self-advocacy. So I think that's about all we have other than some resources for you. You can go through here if you have any questions. I think you've got my email address on the front of the slides, and I'm happy to answer any questions that you might have. Kathleen?
Yes. Yes. We got through that pretty quickly. So there's a lot of assistive technology and augmentative alternate communication, which is also AAC, is very thorough. So it takes a really long time to get through all this information. So thank you, Sharon, for sharing at least a very intro perspective for AT. A couple of things I want to mention, just notes that I jotted down as we were going through the presentation. Was a lot of you asked for resources. Yes, all of those resources that we talked about will be shared, including an AT considerations checklist for infants and toddlers document that's from the National AT Network. And we do also have some resources that are available in Spanish, so we will get those to you. Another thing I want to mention about AAC is that if your child is not communicating at the level of his or her friends and same age peers, you can request a comprehensive AAC evaluation be completed through early intervention or through special education services under Part B. And I get this question a lot when families call me. There's not a one size fits all, which is why a comprehensive AAC evaluation is so important. But I will send information on that when I send the resources this afternoon.
Oh, good. Yeah, I would encourage you not to wait on requesting an AAC evaluation. It's never too early, because so I think that's important. Thank you, Kathleen, for mentioning that.
Absolutely. Yeah, a lot of parents, I wish I would have known sooner because no one on our team brought it up. A comprehensive AAC evaluation should be done by someone who is trained in doing it, and that's usually a speech language pathologist.
Absolutely. And
Elizabeth. Sorry, just jumped right into that. So, and it can, and you can introduce AAC as early as 12 months. Research shows that children with communication challenges do best when it's introduced earlier rather than later. Plus, it helps minimize behavior because, as many of us know, behavior is communication. So if you are experiencing your child having behavior or undesired behaviors, that's the word I'm looking for, they're trying to tell you something. So, and AAC can be sign language. I'll throw that out there.
It absolutely can. Exactly. And as you mentioned, please start early. And it's important to get that AAC evaluation, but it's also important as practitioners and family members that we offer as many opportunities for our children to communicate in any way that they can.
Absolutely. So if you have any other questions, certainly shoot that in the chat box. Sharon and I will answer those for you. Again, I will be following up with resources after the presentation.
Mhm.
And Liz and I will work together on getting this translated into Spanish. That may take a couple of weeks, but we will do that. Sharon, thank you so much for taking the time to share your knowledge with us today. I do appreciate you helping us connect the dots on assistive technology.